Florida. They're trying to get their hands on your money.
Yeah, so the FBI is warning, don't fall for it. As News4Jax reporter Aaron Farrar tells us, these scammers are using threats.
Joint Task Force Calderon. Interim Incident Memorandum. At 4:42 a.m., August 17, 2025, federal agents entered Suite 5B of a beige medical office complex off Harwin Drive in southwest Houston, Texas. The lights were already on. Inside, nothing looked improvised at first. Stainless trays had been laid out in exact order. Surgical tape sat beside sealed catheters. A compressor hummed behind a locked partition wall. There was coffee in a paper cup, still warm. Then, the breach team forced the inner door and the room stopped looking like a clinic. 2 operating tables stood under portable lamps. Refrigerated transport cases lined the far wall. One whiteboard carried blood types, flight numbers, and initials crossed out in red marker. A stack of passports sat beneath a tray of sedatives. In a hidden cabinet behind a false oxygen panel, agents found $3.8 million in vacuum-packed cash, 5 encrypted phones, and a handwritten ledger that did not read like medical notes. It read like inventory. Names, pickup windows, recovery houses, donor readiness. Outbound recipient. Clear after transfer. Outside, dawn had not broken yet. Delivery trucks were already moving on the freeway. Commuters would pass the building in less than an hour without knowing a surgical trafficking node had been operating above a tax office and a chiropractor's suite. But the most dangerous discovery was not the room. It was who appeared in the ledger. A lab supervisor, a procurement broker, a licensed ambulance contractor, a city code inspector paid to miss after-hours activity. This was not one illegal clinic. It was a protected chain. And if the documents in Suite 5B were real, Houston was not the origin of the scheme. It was the command post. To understand how a quiet office park became the center of a $2 billion organ trafficking enterprise, investigators had to rewind 9 months. The first break did not come from a raid. It came from a woman who should not have survived long enough to talk. On November 21, 2024, Pasadena police responded to a dehydration call behind a bus depot near Spencer Highway. The caller was 22-year-old Ana Lucia Moreno, a Honduran migrant who had been recruited through what she believed was a housekeeping placement service. Her abdomen was bandaged. She carried no identification. She kept repeating the same phrase in Spanish. They told me it was a medical exam. At Ben Taub, an emergency physician noticed a fresh flank incision consistent with kidney removal. All hospital staff also found that Ana Lucia's blood work packet had been labeled under another name and routed through a private testing company called Meridian Clinical Logistics, a business that officially handled wellness screening for contract labor crews. That should have been the end of it. Instead, the paperwork vanished from the printer queue within hours. 3 weeks later, a Texas Department of Public Safety trooper stopped a leased Mercedes Sprinter on Interstate 10 west of Sealy for an obscured temporary tag. Inside were 6 sedated passengers, all carrying identical post-op prescriptions, identical discharge instructions, and wristbands linked to a shuttered outpatient center in East Houston. The driver, Marcus Ellery, said he was a medical courier. He also carried 3 burner phones, 1 satellite tracker, and a route sheet coded with warehouse numbers instead of clinic names. That stop forced a federal referral. FBI Houston opened a public corruption and trafficking review. Homeland Security investigations joined within 48 hours. Treasury analysts were brought in after Ellery's accounts showed rapid transfers through staffing firms, transport vendors, and medical supply invoices that had no corresponding patients. Remember that van. It looked like a transport problem. It was actually the first visible seam in a supply chain built to move vulnerable people like cargo, process them through illegal surgical sites, and sell the results through shell companies clean enough to survive a casual audit. Once the warrant team pulled records from Ellery's phones and recovered Ana Lucia's deleted intake forms, the case stopped being local. And analysts at the FBI's Houston field office built the first network map on a windowless 6th-floor conference wall. By the end of January, that map covered 3 states, 2 foreign recruitment corridors, and 14 shell companies spread across Texas, Florida, Arizona, New Jersey, and Delaware. On paper, the companies had nothing to do with transplantation. They looked ordinary. Bayport Workforce Solutions supplied temporary warehouse labor. Gulf Meridian Labs handled blood screening. Cedar Trace Recovery leased post-operative housing. San Jacinto Mobility managed medical transport. 3 more businesses billed as nonprofits offering migrant health outreach. 2 operated freight brokerage accounts. 1 claimed to export refrigeration equipment. Every one of them touched the same small circle of bank users, document preparers, and billing coordinators. The money trail explained the architecture. Small payments moved first. Application fees, bus tickets, security deposits for housing. Then came larger transfers disguised as charitable reimbursements, medical consulting invoices, and courier retainers. When Treasury's financial crimes team overlaid those flows against travel records and lab shipments, 9 international routes emerged: Houston to Monterrey, Guadalajara, San Pedro Sula, Tegucigalpa, Bogota, Miami, Newark, Phoenix, and Dubai. Some routes moved people, some moved samples, some moved recipients who were told their procedures would occur at private specialty facilities outside normal oversight. The evidence got worse. Searches on cloud accounts linked to Meridian Clinical Logistics revealed encrypted ledgers with matching codes for blood types, and tissue compatibility, debt balances, and release status. A person with O-negative blood and no local family support carried a higher value score. A victim with immigration vulnerability could be routed faster. A recipient willing to pay in cryptocurrency or offshore transfer received priority scheduling. Investigators later estimated the ring's full operational value at $2 billion, not because that amount sat in one account, but because pricing tables, future bookings, and contract correspondence showed a pipeline designed for industrial scale. Then the corruption layer surfaced. A Harris County code inspector had cleared properties that were never zoned for medical use. A former hospital credentialing clerk sold badge access data. A laboratory manager at a private diagnostic vendor altered specimen chains so donor blood work could be hidden inside legitimate testing volume. The ring was not surviving on secrecy alone. It was surviving on purchased legitimacy. And still, even then, the case file carried one dangerous assumption, that the surgeons were freelancers renting criminal space. Investigators would soon learn the space itself was part of the system. The machinery of the operation was brutally efficient. Recruitment, screening, isolation, surgery, recovery, transfer. Every stage had a business function and a cover story. Prospective victims were approached through labor recruiters, debt brokers, and medical travel coordinators in Honduras, northern Mexico, and low-income neighborhoods across Texas. Some were promised jobs. Some were offered fast cash for plasma, then pulled into a deeper process once their blood type and tissue markers were tested. Others were coerced after passports were withheld or rent debts were manufactured inside company-owned housing. From there, they entered the Houston corridor. A victim might begin at a bunkhouse near Gulfton under the control of Bayport Workforce Solutions, be taken for lab work at Gulf Meridian, moved at night by San Jacinto Mobility, then held in one of 6 illegal surgical sites hidden inside office suites, recovery homes, or back-converted ambulatory rooms. The sites were scattered across southwest Houston, Pasadena, North Harris County, 1 warehouse clinic near Pearland, 1 suburban house in Katy, and a final contingency suite near the port. What looked like commerce was actually concealment, and medical oxygen was ordered through legitimate vendors. Sterile instruments came through recycled purchasing accounts. Refrigerated cases traveled with invoices marked pathology transport. Recovery patients were housed under occupational injury observation forms. If a victim became unstable, the network used complicit drivers and false names to push them into crowded emergency rooms where complications could be blamed on prior illness. The recipient side was just as organized. Wealthy buyers or intermediaries were routed through concierge services and offshore payments. They rarely met the trafficked donor. Procedures were fragmented, screening in one state, surgery in another, recovery offshore, or under alias registration. By breaking the chain across states and jurisdictions, the ring reduced the chance that any one regulator would see the whole design. Investigators called it a medical supply chain, masquerading as fragmented private care. By spring 2025, surveillance teams were watching storage lockers, apartment drop sites, and 2 freight depots near Beltway 8. They recorded coolers moved with the same discipline used in pharmaceutical distribution. They tracked nurses without active licenses entering buildings after midnight. They watched vans leave Houston, then diverge toward Louisiana, Arizona, and the border. The more they mapped, the clearer the conclusion became. This was not an underground clinic network hiding from the system. It was a network embedded inside the system, feeding off its paperwork, vehicles, vendors, and blind spots. And at the center of the ring sat 3 operators who almost never appeared together. Dr. Daniel Salazar, 51, was the clinical node. He had once trained in transplant surgery in Monterey and later surfaced in Houston as a consultant on international recovery medicine. Witnesses described him as calm, immaculate, and almost invisible in public records. He rarely signed anything directly, but his voice appeared on intercepted calls discussing warm ischemia time, tissue viability, and surgical windows with the detachment of a man scheduling freight. Maria Torres, 44, ran movement. She managed Bayport Workforce Solutions and 2 of the housing shells. Agents later found that she maintained rosters not by legal name, but by blood type, debt status, and route priority. In one seized notebook, victims were sorted under the headings stable, are pressured, and release pending. Robert Chen, 38, was the insider bridge. He supervised specimen processing at Gulf Meridian Labs and knew exactly how to bury unauthorized blood work inside legitimate medical volume. According to the affidavit, Chen also provided badge clone data and vendor scheduling patterns that allowed after-hours access without tripping normal compliance review. But the most important fact about the players was this: none of them looked like a cartel stereotype. They looked like administrators, contractors, mid-level professionals. That was the camouflage. Salazar made the violence sound clinical. Torres made trafficking look like staffing. Chen made illegal surgery disappear into ordinary diagnostics. Around them operated drivers, document forgers, recruiters, apartment managers, and 2 attorneys who set up proxy ownership chains for 14 shell companies. The ring did not depend on monsters in plain sight. It depended on competent people who understood that paperwork can hide a body just as effectively as concrete can. At 3:58 a.m. on August 17th, command staff assembled at an FBI staging site west of downtown Houston. The synchronized raid window had been approved by DOJ 12 hours earlier. 47 federal and state warrants were live. Tactical teams from FBI Houston, HSI, IRSCI, Texas DPS, and U.S. Marshals were assigned to 23 locations across Texas, Arizona, Florida, and New Jersey, with liaison officers coordinating parallel arrests tied to foreign partners in Mexico and Honduras. The first targets were not the surgeons. They were the records. At 4:11, a digital exploitation team entered Gulf Meridian Labs and seized mirrored servers before any remote wipe command could hit. At 4:19, Treasury agents served freeze orders on 12 domestic accounts and 4 brokerage structures linked to the Shell network. By 4:27, air support had eyes on 2 courier vans leaving a storage facility near the ship channel. They were stopped within 6 minutes. One contained surgical packs, cryogenic tags, and 5 sealed envelopes holding cash advances for scheduled donors. Then the breach teams moved. Suite 5B on Harwin, a recovery house in Pasadena, a converted office floor near Hillcroft, a warehouse clinic in Pearland, a suburban residence in Katy with blackout curtains and backup generators, a 6th site near the port used as temporary holding and transfer. All 6 illegal surgical locations were hit inside the same 14-minute span. The scenes were controlled but not clean. At the Pasadena house, agents found 3 women recovering in bunk beds with fresh incisions and no discharge records. At the Pearland site, medics entered behind the stack to stabilize a man identified later as Devin Price, a 34-year-old forklift operator recruited through a debt relief scheme. At the Katie house, a scrub sink was still running when agents entered the procedure room. On a side table sat a consent packet already signed under a false name. Simultaneously, arrest teams moved on the administrative layer. Maria Torres was taken in the parking lot of a transport depot near Hobby Airport. Robert Chen was detained at his condominium in the Museum District while trying to destroy a laptop in a sink. Daniel Salazar attempted to leave through a service corridor behind the Harwin suite and was captured with 2 passports, a sat phone, and a flash drive taped beneath the lining of his medical bag. But the biggest reversal came after the arrests. On Chen's server mirror, analysts found a live scheduling file for 3 additional procedures set to begin within 48 hours in 2 states outside Texas. The operation had not just stopped a network, it had cut into an active cycle still in motion. Follow-on teams were redirected before sunrise. By noon, federal agents had made 47 arrests, rescued victims from 3 holding properties, and triggered emergency welfare checks tied to 80 more names. Hold on to that number. By the end of the identification phase, 112 victims would be documented across the network. And even then, investigators believed they were still counting low. The damage inventory filled annexes. Agents seized 212 donor files, 386 coded specimen labels, 71 burner phones, 19 encrypted drives, and route charts linking Houston to 9 international corridors. They recovered price matrices listing kidneys, partial liver donations, marrow extraction, and priority recipient packages bundled with transport, lodging, and secrecy fees. Those spreadsheets alone helped prosecutors explain how the enterprise reached an estimated $2 billion in projected and realized value. Asset forfeiture teams moved quickly. By the 3rd week, $180 million in cash, real estate, vehicles, brokerage holdings, and cryptocurrency wallets had been frozen or placed under seizure orders. 14 shell companies were tied to the operation. Some existed only on paper, and others had payroll records, insurance policies, and office leases robust enough to survive casual scrutiny. The human evidence was harder to catalog. Victim interviews described coercion by debt, immigration pressure, withheld documents, threats to family members, and fabricated medical consent. Some had scars with no follow-up care. Some had been told they were participating in lawful research. Others knew exactly what was being taken and believed refusal would get them beaten, disappeared, or turned over to immigration authorities by the same people who had trafficked them. For investigators, the question was no longer whether there had been a breach of medicine, labor law, and federal trafficking statutes. But the question was how many institutions had processed pieces of the crime without ever asking why the paperwork fit together so neatly. Ana Lucia Moreno testified that after her surgery she was left in a room with the air conditioner turned so low she could not stop shaking. No nurse gave her a name. No one explained the scar. She was told only that she now owed transportation costs, housing fees, and recovery expenses, and that the debt would follow her brother in Honduras if she talked. Devin Price told agents he answered an online ad for guaranteed warehouse work and a signing bonus. Instead, he was routed through medical screening he did not understand, sedated after what he thought was an employment physical, and woke up unable to stand straight. He later said the worst part was not the pain. It was realizing someone had converted his financial desperation into a surgical commodity. Across Houston, legitimate patients began asking whether the transplant system itself could be trusted. Community clinics reported missed appointments from migrants afraid any blood test might expose them to another pipeline. Nurses who had spent years building trust in vulnerable neighborhoods watched that trust collapse in weeks. The ring did not just steal organs, It poisoned consent, care, and the fragile belief that a hospital corridor is a place where people are protected, not priced. By early 2026, federal prosecutors had filed racketeering, human trafficking, forced labor, organ trafficking, money laundering, wire fraud, and obstruction charges against the principal defendants and dozens of support actors. 8 defendants entered early cooperation talks. 3 fought extradition. Licensing boards in Texas and 2 other states opened emergency reviews tied to contract labs, medical couriers, and outpatient vendors that had touched the network directly or indirectly. The FBI called it one of the most complex medical trafficking conspiracies ever dismantled through a combined corruption and supply chain investigation. But the official language only tells part of the story. This case did not grow because one surgeon turned predatory or one recruiter found desperate people. It grew because modern systems reward fragmentation. One company handles transport, another handles testing, another handles temporary housing, another manages billing, another leases the room, another signs off on code compliance. Each layer sees only its invoice. Its shift, its database entry, its corridor light blinking after midnight. No one sees the crime unless someone forces the records into one frame. That is why Houston mattered. Not because the city was uniquely corrupt, but because it offered everything the enterprise needed in one place. Ports, airports, highways, transient labor, specialized medicine, dense contracting, and enough legitimate movement to hide criminal movement in plain view. Chicago was never the center. Miami was never the center. Those were extensions. Houston was the switching yard. The takedown shattered the core. 6 illegal surgical sites were shut down. 47 arrests broke the command chain. 112 victims were identified. 14 shell companies were exposed. 9 international routes were traced. $180 million was frozen before it could be transferred deeper offshore. Those numbers matter. They are not closure. Because on Salazar's flash drive, investigators also found unfinished expansion files, licensing inquiries in 2 additional states, a short list of new recruiters, and draft contracts for private recovery partnerships abroad. The network had been hit hard, but the market that made it profitable had not disappeared. Wealth still seeks speed. Desperation still gets priced. Systems built for efficiency still create blind corners where predators can work. So the final warning is not that this happened in secret. It is that much of it happened in forms, routes, labs, and buildings that looked completely ordinary until federal agents forced open the doors.